Commander Velthar of the Axiom Empire sat hunched in the darkest corner of the Red Nova canteen on Outpost 7. Her dark green scales were dull and scarred. Telling stories of battles fought across the galaxy, she wrapped her clawed fingers round a glass of Zephyrian whiskey, the strongest drink in known space. The burning liquid slid down her throat, but it couldn't wash away the nightmares that visited her every night. The cantina was filled with smoke and the chatter of dozens of alien species. Traders, smugglers, mercenaries, and soldiers from across the galaxy came here to forget their troubles. But Velthar wasn't here to forget. She was here because nowhere else felt safe anymore. Her compound eyes, which could see in multiple spectrums of light, constantly scanned the room. Old habits died hard. Even now, 2 years after the war ended, she still expected to see a human face in every shadow, still jumped at sudden movements, still woke up screaming from dreams of endless corridors, filled with the sound of human footsteps. 3 young Axiom recruits pushed through the crowd toward her table. They couldn't have been more than 50 years old. Barely adults by Axiom standards, their scales still gleamed bright blue-green, unmarked by battle scars. Their eyes sparkled with the kind of excitement that only came from never having seen real combat. The first recruit, a tall male with ceremonial markings still fresh on his arms, stepped forward. His voice cracked with nervousness as he spoke. "Commander Velthar, ma'am, we're sorry to bother you, but we've heard incredible stories about the human war. The other veterans won't talk about it, but everyone says you were there from the beginning. They say you led the greatest victories against the human colonies." Velthar's head snapped up, her predator instincts kicking in automatically. The recruits took a step back as her eyes fixed on them in the dim light of the cantina. Her scarred face looked like something from their worst nightmares. Victories. The word came out like a hiss, her voice rough from years of shouting orders over the sound of plasma fire. "You think there were victories in that war?" The second recruit, a female with bright intelligent eyes, spoke up quickly. "The official reports say we won decisive battles on 12 human worlds. They say you personally led the assault on Epsilon Prime that broke their main defensive line." Velthar's claws scraped against the metal table, leaving deep gouge in the surface. All other patrons in the cantina turned to look, then quickly turned away. Everyone knew better than to get involved when a war veteran was having an episode. The reports, Velthar laughed. But there was no humor in the sound. It was the kind of laugh that came from someone who had seen too much, lost too much, survived too much. The reports were written by politicians and generals who never set foot on a battlefield. They were written by cowards who needed the galaxy to believe we were still the superior species. She lifted her glass and drained it in one gulp, then slammed it down so hard that cracks appeared in the thick ceramic. The sound echoed through the cantina like a gunshot, and for a moment, every conversation stopped. "You want to know about humans?" Velthar leaned forward, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "You want to know what it's really like to face them in battle, to look into their eyes and see something that shouldn't exist in any civilized species." The 3 recruits glanced at each other uncertainly. This wasn't the heroic war story they had been expecting. The third recruit, younger than the others, spoke hesitantly. "Ma'am, our training officers say humans are primitive. They say they only have basic weapons and no real military discipline. They say..." Velthar cut him off with a growl. "Everyone says things about humans. The scientists say they're barely evolved from animals. The politicians say they're not a real threat to the Empire. The generals say they can be conquered like any other primitive species." She reached across the table and grabbed the young recruit's arm with one clawed hand. Her grip was strong enough to dent metal armor, and the recruit winced in pain. "But I've seen what humans really are. I've watched them do things that defy every law of nature, every rule of warfare, every instinct for self-preservation that exists in the known galaxy. I've seen them fight when they should have surrendered. I've seen them smile when they should have been screaming. I've seen them win when winning was impossible." The cantina had gone completely silent now. Even the bartender, a massive creature with 6 arms and skin like stone, had stopped what he was doing to listen. War stories were common in places like this. But everyone could sense that this was different. This was something real, something that came from a place of genuine terror. Velthar released the recruit's arm and sat back in her chair. For a moment, her eyes seemed to focus on something far away. Something that only she could see. "You want to hear about the war, about what really happened on those human worlds?" She looked at each of the recruits in turn, studying their eager faces. "Then sit down. Order drinks, strong ones, because once I start talking, once you hear what I have to say, you'll never look at humans the same way again. You'll never feel safe in the dark again, and you'll understand why every night for the past 2 years I've wished I had never survived to tell this story." The recruits sat down quickly, their earlier excitement replaced by a mixture of fear and fascination. They had come looking for glory stories, tales of heroic battles and crushing victories. Instead, they were about to hear something far more valuable and far more terrifying. The truth daughters Velthar began to speak. Her mind drifted back to that cursed day on Epsilon Prime, where she first learned that humans weren't just another primitive species to be conquered. They were something else entirely, something that would haunt her dreams forever. 2 years earlier, the massive Axiom Dreadnought * Death's Edge * cut through the darkness of space like a blade through silk. The ship was a monster of metal and plasma, stretching over 3 kilometers, from bow to stern. Its hull bristled with enough firepower to crack a moon in half. Inside the command bridge, dozens of alien officers worked at their stations, their scaled fingers dancing across holographic displays. Commander Velthar stood at the center of it all, her imposing figure casting long shadows under the bridge's crimson lighting. She was younger then, her scale still bright and unmarked by the scars that would come later. Her confidence filled the room like electricity. She had conquered 17 worlds for the Axiom Empire, and Epsilon Prime would be number 18. Captain Murdoch approached her station, his forearms carrying multiple data tablets. He was Velthar's most trusted aide, a brilliant tactical officer who had served with her for over a decade. His normally calm demeanor showed hints of excitement as he reviewed the intelligence reports. "Commander, our long-range scanners have completed their analysis of the target," Murdoch announced, his voice carrying across the bridge. "Epsilon Prime shows all the signs of a typical primitive civilization. The inhabitants are bipedal mammals, similar to the Terran classification we studied in xenobiology courses." Velthar turned from the massive viewing screen that showed the blue-green planet growing larger ahead of them. "Show me the tactical breakdown." A 3-dimensional hologram materialized above the command table. The planet rotated slowly, marked with red and green indicators. Murdoch pointed with one of his clawed fingers at various locations on the display. Population centers are concentrated around 5 major cities. The largest is here, their capital, with approximately 2.8 million inhabitants. Our deep scans show they use basic kinetic projectile weapons, essentially metal slugs fired by chemical propulsion. No plasma technology, no energy shields, no gravitic weapons. Their most advanced aircraft appear to be atmospheric jet fighters that couldn't even reach orbit under their own power. Another officer called out from the sensor station, "Commander, we're detecting approximately 8,000 military personnel in the capital city alone." Total planetary defense forces estimated at around 50,000 individuals. Vilthar studied the numbers with satisfaction. Her invasion force consisted of 45,000 elite Axiom shock troopers, each one equipped with plasma rifles, personal energy shields, and power armor that could withstand direct hits from primitive kinetic weapons. They had orbital support from 12 heavy cruisers and the Dreadnought's massive plasma cannons. Their technology level, she asked pre-space age, Commander. They have satellites and space stations, but no faster-than-light travel, no energy weapons beyond basic electrical systems. They're essentially throwing rocks at us while we have the power of stars at our fingertips. The bridge crew chuckled at Murdoch's comment. It was a common joke among Axiom forces. Primitive species always thought their basic weapons could somehow compete with technology that was thousands of years more advanced. Vilthar walked to the viewing screen and placed her hands behind her back. Watching the planet grow larger. Begin orbital bombardment protocols. Target all military installations. Government buildings and communication centers. I want their command structure completely destroyed before we set foot on the surface. Yes, Commander, came the immediate response from the weapons officer, charging main plasma batteries. Secondary batteries standing by. The Dreadnought's massive weapons. Systems hummed to life along the ship's hull. Dozens of plasma cannons rotated toward the planet below. Each weapon contained enough destructive power to level a mountain. Bombardment commencing in 3, 2, 1. Fire. The darkness of space lit up like a second sun as the asterisk Death's Edge asterisk unleashed its fury streams of superheated plasma lanced down through Epsilon Prime's atmosphere, leaving trails of fire across the sky. The capital city's skyline disappeared in flashes of brilliant light as government buildings, military bases, and communication towers were reduced to molten slag for 30 minutes. The bombardment continued. The planet's surface glowed with fires that could be seen from orbit. Entire city blocks simply ceased to exist, replaced by smoking craters of melted stone and metal. Scanning for life signs, the sensor officer reported. All targeted areas show complete elimination of hostile forces. No heat signatures, no electrical activity, no communications traffic. Murdoch reviewed his tablet with satisfaction. Perfect execution, Commander. Their primitive infrastructure couldn't withstand even a basic orbital strike. Ready for ground deployment. Vilthar nodded. Deploy all ground forces. I want this planet secured before their sun sets. The Empire expects quick results, and I intend to deliver them. Throughout the massive ship, alarms began to sound. In the hangar bays, thousands of Axiom soldiers moved with practiced efficiency toward their dropships. The troops were the Empire's finest, veterans of dozens of campaigns, equipped with the most advanced armor and weapons in the galaxy. As the first wave of dropships launched from the Dreadnought's belly, Vilthar felt the familiar rush of impending victory. Another primitive world would fall before Axiom might. Another chapter would be added to her legend. But as the sleek assault craft descended through the planet's atmosphere, something began to feel wrong. The cities below were empty, not destroyed. Empty. The orbital bombardment had created massive craters where government buildings once stood. But the residential areas, the commercial districts, the industrial zones, they were intact but completely vacant. Where are the fleeing civilians? Murdoch asked, studying his scanners with growing confusion. After an orbital strike, primitive species usually panic. We should be seeing mass evacuations, emergency vehicles. Some kind of response from their population. Vilthar frowned as she watched the live feeds from the dropships. The capital city spread out below them like a ghost town. Streets that should have been filled with panicking inhabitants were completely empty. No traffic. No lights in windows. No signs of life anywhere. The first dropships touched down in the city's central square with barely a whisper. Axiom soldiers poured out of the craft, their weapons ready, their sensors scanning for targets. But there was nothing to shoot at. Alpha Squad reporting. Came a voice over the communication system. Landing zone is secure. No hostile contacts. No contacts at all. Actually, sir, this place is completely empty. More reports flooded in from landing zones across the city. Every squad reported the same thing. Perfect landings, no resistance. No civilians. No signs of life. It was as if the entire population had simply vanished. Sir, came a nervous voice from Beta Squad. We're checking the weapons caches that intelligence identified. The buildings are here, but they're empty. Not looted. Not destroyed. Just empty. Like someone carefully removed everything and left. Vilthar felt something cold crawl up her spine. In all her years of conquest, she had never encountered anything like this. Primitive species were predictable. They either fought desperately and died heroically, or they surrendered quickly and begged for mercy. They didn't just disappear. Gam Squad, expand your search pattern. She ordered. Check residential areas, underground facilities, any place the population might be hiding. Already on it. Commander, we've searched 12 city blocks. Every building is empty. Not abandoned. Empty. Like someone told everyone to leave and take only what they could carry. As reports continued to pour in from across the planet, Velthar realized they weren't fighting a primitive species at all. They were facing something that had anticipated their arrival, prepared for their tactics, and vanished like smoke before the battle even began. The first cold finger of dread touched her spine as she be. Eager to understand that everything they thought they knew about humans was wrong, the first explosion ripped through the morning silence like thunder. Velthar was standing in the temporary command center they had set up in what used to be the city's main government building. Round her, dozens of Axiom officers worked at portable holographic displays, coordinating the search for the missing human population. The blast wave shattered every window in a 3-block radius. Velthar was thrown backward, her armored body slamming into a concrete wall. For a moment, her vision went white. When it cleared, alarms were screaming throughout the building, and half her command staff was either dead or wounded. Report. She shouted, blood trickling from a cut above her left eye, before anyone could answer. A second explosion erupted from the building's basement, then a third from the roof. Then explosions began going off all across the city like a deadly symphony. Contact. From Delta Squad, her communications officer screamed over the chaos. His four-armed body was hunched over his console, trying to make sense of the flood of emergency transmissions. They're under attack. Multiple hostiles emerging from. The transmission cut to static. Then another voice broke through. Echo, squad taking heavy casualties. They're coming from the sewers. They're everywhere. Velthar grabbed her plasma rifle and rushed to the shattered window. What she saw below defied everything she thought she knew about warfare. From manholes in the street, humans were emerging like ghosts. They weren't wearing uniforms or carrying advanced weapons. Most looked like ordinary civilians. Men and women in simple clothes, some barely more than teenagers. But they moved with the deadly precision of apex predators. A group of her soldiers had taken cover behind their armored transport vehicle. They had energy shields, plasma weapons, and armor that could stop a direct hit from a tank. They should have been invulnerable to primitive human weapons. But the humans weren't fighting like any enemy she had ever faced. One of them, a male who looked to be in his 30s, came running straight down the middle of the street. He wasn't taking cover. wasn't trying to flank her soldiers. He was charging directly at them with what looked like a crude chemical rifle and several cylindrical objects strapped to his chest. Hyanwu, she heard other humans shouting, "Now! Do it now!" The Axiom soldiers opened fire with their plasma weapons. The first shot hit the human in the shoulder, spinning him round. The second caught him in the leg, sending him tumbling to the ground. Any civilized species would have surrendered or at least sought cover. Hyanwu kept crawling forward, even as plasma fire burned holes through his body. Even as his clothes caught fire and his skin began to char, he kept moving toward the Axiom position. His face showed no fear, no pain, only determination. When he was close enough, he pulled a pin from one of the devices on his chest and smiled. The explosion killed 6 Axiom soldiers instantly. Their advanced armor, designed to withstand the most powerful weapons in the galaxy, was shredded by a crude chemical bomb that any species would have considered primitive. But that was just the beginning. From a building that her forces had already searched and cleared, another human appeared. This one was a female, and according to the tactical reports, she should have been dead. Mi-Jin had been in a structure that collapsed during the orbital bombardment 3 hours earlier. The scanners showed no life signs in the rubble, but there she was, dragging herself across a rooftop with a broken spine, her legs useless behind her. In her hands was a long-barreled kinetic weapon, what humans called a sniper rifle. Velthar watched in horror as Mi-Jin positioned herself at the edge of the building. The woman's face was covered in blood and dust. Her breathing was labored. She was clearly dying from internal injuries. She took carefully and fired. Commander Zothic, one of Velthar's most experienced officers, dropped dead with a hole through his head. The primitive kinetic projectile had somehow found the one weak spot in his advanced helmet. Mi-Jin worked the bolt on her weapon and fired again. Another officer fell. "Take her out," Velthar screamed into her communicator. A squad of soldiers turned their plasma weapons toward the rooftop. The entire building erupted in flames as concentrated energy beams tore through the structure. When the smoke cleared, there was nothing left but burning rubble. But Mi-Jin had managed to fire 6 more shots before the building collapsed. 6 more Axiom officers were dead. "They don't retreat." Captain Murdoch's voice crackled through the communication system. His usual calm demeanor was completely gone, replaced by something Velthar had never heard from him before: pure terror. "Commander, they don't surrender. They don't run. What's wrong with these creatures?" All across the city, similar scenes were playing out. Humans were emerging from impossible hiding places, from sewers that should have been flooded with toxic gas, from buildings that had been searched multiple times, from underground tunnels that their scanners hadn't detected. They fought with weapons that should have been useless against Axiom technology. Chemical explosives, kinetic projectiles, even improvised devices made from household materials. But somehow they were winning. "Alpha Squad is down," came another frantic transmission. "They came from inside the walls." How did they get inside? The walls? Velthar studied her tactical display in growing horror. Red icons representing her forces were disappearing from the map at an alarming rate. Each red dot that vanished represented a squad of elite soldiers, beings who had trained for decades, equipped with the most advanced technology in the galaxy. They were being systematically eliminated by a species that shouldn't have been able to scratch their armor. "Bravo Squad, report your status," she ordered. "We're pinned down in the shopping district," came the reply. "They're using the buildings themselves as weapons. They've turned every doorway into a trap, every window into a sniper's nest, sir. They know the city better than we do. It's like they've been planning this for months." "Charlie Squad, heavy casualties, Commander. They hit us with some kind of acid, eat right through our armor like it was paper. How do primitives know about molecular acids? The truth was beginning to dawn on Velthar. The humans hadn't disappeared. When the orbital bombardment began, they had hidden. Not just hidden. They had prepared. They had turned their entire city into a weapon, and her forces had walked right into the trap. "Sir," her sensor officer called out, "I'm picking up movement in the subway tunnels. Massive heat signatures moving toward our position. How many? I can't tell. The tunnel system is too complex. Could be hundreds. Could be thousands." Velthar felt her blood turn cold. She had invaded primitive worlds before. She knew how they were supposed to react. They were supposed to panic, to flee, to beg for mercy. They weren't supposed to fight back with this level of coordination and tactical intelligence. And they certainly weren't supposed to be winning. As explosions continued to rock the city around her, Velthar realized that everything the Axiom Empire thought it knew about humans was wrong. They weren't primitive. They weren't helpless. They were hunters. And for the first time in her military career, Velthar understood what it felt like to be preyed on by the third day of what was supposed to be a quick victory. Commander Velthar stood among the smoking ruins of her once mighty invasion force. The numbers on her tactical display told a story that should have been impossible. Of the 45,000 elite Axiom shock troopers she had brought to this cursed planet, fewer than 20,000 remained combat-ready. The humans had retreated to the industrial district on the east side of the capital city. Intelligence reports suggested approximately 1,200 human defenders had taken refuge in a complex maze of factories, warehouses, and manufacturing plants. The area was a perfect killing ground. Narrow alleys between massive buildings, countless hiding spots, and industrial equipment that could be turned into weapons. Velthar gathered her remaining officers round a holographic map of the district. Her armor was scorched and dented from 3 days of urban warfare unlike anything in Axiom military history. Several of her commanders bore visible wounds, and all of them had the hollow look of soldiers who had seen too much. "This ends today," she declared, her voice carrying the authority that had conquered 17 worlds. "We have them surrounded. No way in, no way out. 20,000 of us against 1,200 of them. We finished this with overwhelming force." Captain Murdoch, his left arm in a medical sling from a human explosive device, studied the tactical display. "Commander, our scouts report they've fortified the entire district. Every building is a potential stronghold. Then we level every building." Velthar replied coldly. "No more games. No more surprises. We go in with maximum firepower and turn that entire district into ash." The final assault began at dawn. Axiom forces advanced from 3 directions, their plasma weapons charging the air with deadly energy. Heavy assault mechs stomped through the streets, their cannon arms swiveling to target any sign of movement. Overhead, combat drones buzzed like mechanical insects, scanning for heat signatures. The first factory they encountered looked abandoned. It was a massive steel and concrete structure that had once manufactured some kind of industrial machinery. The building was 4 stories tall with dozens of windows, most of them now shattered from the fighting. "Delta Company, breach and clear," Velthar ordered. A full company of Axiom soldiers approached the main entrance. They moved with practiced precision, their energy shields overlapping to create an impenetrable wall of protection. The first soldiers reached the massive steel doors and planted breaching charges. The explosion tore the doors from their hinges, sending twisted metal flying across the factory floor. Smoke poured from the opening as the soldiers advanced into the darkness beyond. That's when they discovered what a human teenager named Deho had been doing for the past 3 days. The boy couldn't have been more than 17 years old by human standards. He should have been in school, playing games, worrying about trivial things. Instead, he had spent 72 hours turning an entire factory into the most elaborate death trap Veltha had ever seen. Industrial chemical containers had been repositioned throughout the building, connected by a web of improvised detonation cords. Heavy machinery had been rigged to fall at the pull of a single lever. The building's own support structure had been weakened in precise locations, turning the entire factory into a house of cards waiting to collapse. When the Axiom soldiers breached the main entrance, Deho was waiting in a control room on the 3rd floor. He had been there for hours, watching through security cameras he had rewired, waiting for the perfect moment. He pulled one simple switch. The factory came apart like a puzzle being disassembled. Chemical explosions chain reacted through the building, setting off secondary blasts that shook the ground for miles. Support beams that had held up the structure for decades suddenly gave way, sending tons of steel and concrete crushing down. To full companies of Axiom soldiers, over 400 elite warriors, were crushed in seconds. The building collapsed so completely that rescue was impossible. Deho died in the collapse, but he had taken 20 times his number with him. Sweet merciful void. Murdoch whispered as they watched the factory turn into a mountain of rubble. How did a child do that? The assault continued, but the pattern repeated itself throughout the district. Every building was a trap. Every room held a surprise. The humans had spent 3 days preparing for this final battle. They had prepared well. In a warehouse that stored automotive parts. A human female named Sunmi had lost her left arm to plasma fire on the 2nd day of fighting. Any civilized species would have sought medical attention or at least retreated to a safe area. Instead, Sunmi had turned her injury into a weapon, using her own blood as ink. She had written tactical information on the warehouse walls, patrol, schedules, weak points in Axiom armor, attack patterns, everything the human defenders needed to know. When Axiom forces finally breached the warehouse, they found detailed intelligence painted in red across every surface. Sunmi was still there, still conscious despite massive blood loss, still coordinating the defense through a handheld radio. She looked up at the Axiom soldiers with eyes that showed no fear, no pain, only determination. Sector 7 is clear. She spoke calmly into her radio as plasma fire erupted around her. Send the children through the north tunnel. Watch for the mechs on street level. She continued giving orders even as energy beams tore through her body. Her final transmission, sent as she collapsed, directed a group of human civilians to safety through escape routes the Axiom forces hadn't even known existed. But it was what happened in the district's main administrative building that finally broke something inside Veltha's mind. She waited. Humans are incredibly patient when they need to be. Yunju worked the night shift, invisible to our security forces, just another anonymous worker maintaining the government buildings. She learned which officials had access to classified information, which computer systems were vulnerable, which security protocols had weaknesses. When she finally revealed herself, it was during a live broadcast of the Axiom Council's emergency session about the human threat. She had hacked into the planetary communication network and interrupted the transmission. For 10 minutes, she broadcast the exact coordinates of our military headquarters, our fleet positions, our defensive installations. By the time security reached the broadcast station, she was gone, but the damage was done. Every human resistance cell in the galaxy now knew exactly where to find us. Velthar's voice dropped to almost a whisper. That's when our intelligence services finally understood what we were dealing with. Humans weren't just soldiers. They were a species that had evolved on a world where everything was trying to kill them. Day of their existence was a fight for survival against impossible odds. Their planet had predators that could tear them apart with claws and teeth. They had diseases that could kill in hours. They had weather patterns that could freeze or burn them to death. They had poisonous plants, venomous creatures, natural disasters that could level entire cities, and somehow they not only survived, they thrived. They became the apex predators of their own world, not through strength or natural weapons, but through intelligence, adaptability, and absolute refusal to give up. The cantina around them seemed to hold its breath. Velthar continued. Every human carries the genetic memory. Every one of them has the instinct to survive when survival should be impossible. They don't have our plasma weapons or our energy shields. But they have something far more dangerous. What? The youngest recruit asked, though his voice suggested he already knew the answer would terrify him. They simply refuse to die. No matter how badly wounded, no matter how outnumbered, no matter how hopeless the situation appears, humans will continue fighting until their last breath, and even then, they'll find a way to hurt you with that final breath. Velthar drained her glass and stood up slowly. Her movements were those of someone much older than his, someone who had seen too much and carried too many burdens. Take my advice, young ones. If you ever encounter humans in battle, you have exactly two choices. Kill every single one of them before they know you're there, or run as far and as fast as you can. Because if you leave even one alive, if you give them even a moment to think, to plan, to adapt, they will hunt you across the galaxy until either you're dead or they are. She walked toward the cantina's exit, her footsteps echoing in the silence. At the door, she paused and looked back at the three recruits. And here's the truly terrifying part. They'll enjoy every moment of it. Humans don't just fight to survive. They fight because they love the challenge. They love proving that they can overcome impossible odds. They love showing the universe that being primitive doesn't mean being weak. As the door closed behind her with a soft hiss, the three recruits sat in stunned silence. Round them, the cantina slowly returned to its normal buzz of conversation. But the atmosphere had changed. Everyone had heard the story, and everyone understood its implications. Outside, among the stars, the Axiom Empire continued to exist only because they had learned to avoid human space entirely. The Non-Aggression Pact wasn't a treaty between equals. It was a promise from a superior technological civilization to leave the humans alone. Because the alternative was too terrifying to contemplate. In the depths of space, on ships traveling between distant stars, the names of humans like Hanmu, Mi-Jin, Daeho, Sunmi, Taeyang, Jaemin, and Yunju had become whispered legends, not just among their own species, but among every alien civilization that had learned what happened when you pushed humanity too far. The galaxy had learned a valuable lesson that would echo through the ages. Humans might be primitive by technological standards, but they were the one species that would never, ever give up, and in a universe full of advanced civilizations and superior technologies. Sometimes the most dangerous weapon was simply the refusal to accept defeat. ***, the end ***.